Amen. John chapter 9 is dealing with one of the 7 signs or miracles that you find in the book of John. John, by inspiration, writes the last gospel account in which he records and focuses in on 7 of the miracles or the signs of Jesus. And we are in John chapter 9 as we look at the man who was born blind receives his sight. And here we have a miracle of someone receiving their sight. Even with our advanced technology that we have today, to get someone to see just a little bit is a remarkable thing. I remember seeing a documentary where a person was seeing just a few images and just a few things for the first time in their life, and they had some implant placed into their optic area to help them just to see just a little bit. And here Jesus is going to totally and completely heal a man who has never seen anything. So it's truly a remarkable miracle, and it shows the spiritual reason why Jesus came into the world is to open the eyes of the blind. Blinded by sin, those who have been deceived by the devil, He is there to be the light of the world. And so we see this in John chapter 9. In the book it says verses 1 through 42, but if you look very carefully, there's only 41 verses in this chapter. So this is a mistake of the author, Brother Winkler. He added one more verse than should be in his numbering there. John chapter 9 and verse 1, Now as Jesus passed by, he saw a man who was blind from birth. And his disciples asked him, saying, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? That is kind of a misconception that was held in the first century, and sometimes even people today hold that misconception. Why is this child born with this malady, with this defect, with this blindness? And some cultures believe it is because they're suffering from things of the past. Of course, we don't exist before our conception, so how could you sin before you're born? And of course, the concept of the sins of the parents being passed down, we know as false, based on Ezekiel 18 and verse 20. In verse 3, Jesus answered, said, Neither this man nor his parents sinned, but that the works of God should be revealed in him. This man is not born blind because he personally sinned or his parents personally sinned. And we know from the big picture of the Bible why people are born with problems and defects and mutations and blindness and all kinds of disorders is because we lived in a cursed realm. And that's due to the initial sin of Adam and Eve, in which God placed a curse upon the earth. And we know that in heaven that curse will be no more. Revelation chapter 21 and 22. No more death, no more sadness, no more crying. So it's not because of personal sins or his parents' sins, but that the works of God may be revealed in him. Here's an opportunity for God to show his power in this man by healing him. In verse 4, I must work the works of him who sent me while it is day. The night is coming when no one can work. While it is day is talking about his life. And I must work the works of him who sent me. Jesus was busy about his Father's business, about his Father's work. He said, the night is coming when no one can work. Verse 5, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world. Light and darkness are found throughout the book of John, indicating light, indicating revelation and that which is right and holy, and darkness representing that which is wicked and evil and contrary to God's will. Verse 6, and when he had said these things, he spat on the ground, made clay with the saliva, and he anointed the eyes of the man with the clay. And he said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Now here's an unusual way Jesus performed this miracle. We've seen the different ways in which he could do it. We see that he could do it over distances. He didn't even have to be in the same place to heal certain individuals. We see in some occasions he would touch an individual. Here he's making clay of the spittle on the ground and anointing his eyes with it. He could do it any way He so chose. And so we see here that God is using this means to bring about a blessing. And you put that over into the plan of salvation. God chose water to be the place where a person receives the forgiveness of sins and the benefits of the blood of Christ. Acts 2 and verse 38, Acts 22 and verse 16. And so that's where He chose to do that in the plan of salvation. He came back seeing. Therefore, verse 8, the neighbors and those who previously had seen that he was blind said, is not this he who sat and begged? Again, here's a public, open miracle that everyone was aware of. Some said, this is he, and others said, he is like him. He said, I am he. Therefore they said to him, how were your eyes open? And he answered and said, a man called Jesus made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed, and I received my sight. And they said to him, where is he? And he said, I do not know. Notice, Jesus did not require this man to have faith for this to happen. In fact, after the Pharisees cross-examined this man and cast him out of the synagogue, verses 13 through 34, they cast him out, verse 34, because he said Jesus of Nazareth did this. Verse 35 of John chapter 9, Jesus heard that they cast him out. And when he had found him, he said, do you believe in the Son of God? And he answered and said, who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? He doesn't even have faith in the Son of God till after the miracle. Till after. So the miracle was something that confirmed Jesus to be who he was, the Son of God. Verse 37, Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and it is he who is talking to you. Then he said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. You notice throughout the gospel accounts, Jesus received people who worshipped him. Why? Because he's God. The angel in the book of Revelation refused worship. Why? He's a creature. Peter, in Acts chapter 10, when Cornelius fell at his feet, Peter said, get up, I'm just a man. He's a creature. Jesus received worship. He didn't refuse it because he is divine. So we see here that this miracle prompted this man to come to a faith that Jesus is the Son of God and to worship him. And notice Jesus, the friend of the outcast. They cast him out, but Jesus was there to receive him. And so we should have that attitude of Christ as well. We should be reaching out to the outcast, helping those who are in need, whereas the religious establishment of the day, the Pharisees, were contrary to the teachings of Jesus and wanted to find fault with him and couldn't even glorify God that a miracle had taken place. They were so bent on finding fault with Jesus. They couldn't even be happy about the miracle that had happened. So here we see Jesus opening the eyes of the blind. In our study guide, page 60, number 6 there on page 60, the location is the pool of Siloam in Jerusalem. Those present, Jesus, his disciples, a blind man, his parents, and the Pharisees. You see that throughout the chapter. The need, we are introduced to the only man in the gospel account born blind. The miracle, upon Jesus anointing his eyes with saliva-made clay and his washing in the pool, the man received his sight. The result, there was doubt and questioning by his neighbors, denial by the Pharisees, such being followed by an inquisition of the man and his parents. There was also accusation, ridicule, and expulsion. They cast him out. However, upon Jesus revealing himself to the healed man, the man said, Lord, I believe, and he worshipped him. So we see what man rejects, God is there to help. God is there to receive. And what people reject, God is willing to be there for them. He was there to assist the outcast. Any questions or comments about this before we go into the next miracle? Look at John chapter 11. John chapter 11, the whole chapter is at least through 44, 1 through 44, is dealing with the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead, and verses 45 through 57, the plot of the Pharisees to kill Jesus for what he did. Of course, we're focusing on the miracle here, the resurrection of Lazarus from the dead. And so we're going to see this set forth very clearly. Look at chapter 11 and verse 1. Now a certain man was sick, named Lazarus of Bethany, the town of Mary, and the town of Mary and her sister Martha. We see Mary and Martha in other settings as well. It was the Mary who anointed the Lord with fragrant oil and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. Verse 3, therefore the sisters sent to him, saying, Lord, behold, whom you love is sick. This seems to be someone that was very close to Jesus. Referred to, the one whom you love is sick. Verse 3, therefore the sisters sent, Lord, behold, the one whom you love is sick. Verse 4, when Jesus heard that, he said, this sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God, that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Now what he's saying in verse 4 is not that the fact that Lazarus is going to die, but the end result of this sickness is not death, but glorifying God. Because he knows he's going to go raise him from the dead. And that's going to bring glory to God. So the end result of this sickness is not going to be death, because he's going to interrupt that by raising him from the dead. In verse 5 here, some have twisted and perverted these verses to say that here it says Jesus loved Martha and her sister, and those were the two wives of Jesus. Do you know that? The Mormons of the 1800s used to try to use verses like this to say Jesus was married and he had multiple wives. And here's two of his wives, Martha and the sister Mary. Well, that's just as ridiculous as can be. I mean, there's no way you're going to get that out of that verse unless you have some false prophet trying to impose that meaning into the verses. Verse 6, so when he heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. When word got to him that Lazarus was sick, he delayed. In fact, there's a little pamphlet right there next to the door. And the title of that pamphlet is When Jesus Arrived Late. And it's about this story here of Jesus arriving late, giving time for Lazarus to die so he could go perform this miracle and raise him from the dead. Probably the only time he arrived late somewhere, and he did it for a reason. He did it for a reason. When he had heard that he was sick, he stayed 2 more days in the place where he was. Verse 7, then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, lately the Jews sought to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered and said, are there not 12 hours in a day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble because he sees the light of this world. But if one walks in the night, he stumbles because the light is not in him. These things he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I might wake him up. He's still talking about the concept of I have things I have to do. I have a limited time to do them. In fact, throughout the book of John, he's going to say concerning the Jews that were plotting against him, wanted to kill him, and made him so mad they picked up stones to stone at him. My time has not yet come. my hour has not yet come. It was fast approaching. He was heading towards Jerusalem, which meant persecution, which meant the cross. And he's saying that, I've got things I've got to do. And he's playing on the concept of being the light of the world as well. But if you walk in darkness, you stumble because the light is not in him. He says, our friend Lazarus sleeps, but I go that I might wake him up. Then his disciples said, Lord, if he sleeps, he will get well. However, Jesus spoke of his death, but they thought that he was speaking about taking rest and sleep. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. Then Thomas, who is called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. Kind of a pessimistic response. Let us go. The Jews are seeking to kill him. Let's go with him and we'll die with him. Is kind of what I get from this statement. But notice what Jesus said. He calls the death of Lazarus sleep. Anytime you read in the Bible, this is universally true in the Old and New Testament. Anytime you read in the Bible, it talks about death being sleep. It's always referring to the body, not the soul. It's always referring to the physical body, not the soul. Why? What does a body look like? It looks like it's sleeping, right? The appearance of the body is that of sleep. The body is not inhabited by the spirit anymore in death. The spirit goes on. So sleep has reference to the physical body, not to the soul. The soul doesn't sleep. The body does in death. And he says in verse 14, Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I'm glad for your sakes I wasn't there. He was glad he wasn't there to heal Lazarus, to prevent him from dying, because he was going to do something that was going to have a greater impact. He withheld a blessing for a greater blessing to come later on. I think there might be a lesson for us there. He withheld something for something greater to take place later on. I'm glad for your sakes that I was not there, that you may believe. Nevertheless, let us go to him. So he's wanting to strengthen their faith. And he's going to use one of those I am statements that you find throughout the book of John. I am the resurrection and life. Well, one of the best ways to teach someone a lesson like that is to show them. Show them I'm the resurrection and life. Okay? Let's go to this man's graveside and let me raise him from the dead. Actions speak louder than words. Verse 17. So when Jesus came, he found that he had already been in the tomb for 4 days. According to my understanding, the Jewish people did not embalm their bodies of the dead. They would wrap them. They would put spices and types of ointments on the body, wrap the body, and entomb the body. And so there was no embalming process that took place. He'd been in the tomb for 4 days. Verse 18, now Bethany was near Jerusalem, about 2 miles away. And many of the Jews had joined the women around Martha and Mary to comfort them concerning their brother. Now look at that. Jesus knew he was going to have an audience here. Many of the Jews were there. That wouldn't have happened if he just healed him from his sickness. This miracle is going to have a greater impact than just raising him up from his sickness. Verse 20. Now Martha, as soon as she heard that Jesus was coming, went and met him, but Mary was sitting in the house. Verse 21. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. If you'd have been here, you could have saved him. You could have kept him from dying. Verse 22. But even now I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Verse 34, Martha said to him, verse 23. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day, Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and life. He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. Do you believe this? And she said, Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. Now notice this. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha says, I know he's going to rise again at the end of time. There was a Jewish concept, even in the Old Testament, of a resurrection from the dead. Let's look at a few passages. Isaiah chapter 26. Of course, you have the prophecies about the resurrection of Jesus from the dead, but there was also the concept of a resurrection of the dead, all the dead, in the Old Testament. Isaiah chapter 26 and verse 19. Your dead shall live, together with my dead body they shall rise. Awake and sing, you who dwell in dust. For your dew is like the dew of herbs, and the earth shall cast out the dead. Resurrection. That's language talking about the dead shall live. They're going to awaken. Of course, he's talking about the resurrection of the righteous here. They're going to awake and sing praises to God. And the earth shall cast out the dead. So there was an Old Testament concept of a resurrection from the dead. Look at Daniel chapter 12. Daniel chapter 12, you also find this. This is very similar to the words of Jesus found in John chapter 5. Daniel chapter 12 and verse 2. And many of those who sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. Those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. So there's that concept of a resurrection. Jesus said in John 5, Marvel not at this, for the hour is coming when all that are in their graves will hear His voice and come forth. They that have done good unto the resurrection of life, they that have done evil unto the resurrection of condemnation. Almost word for word what Daniel's saying here. There's going to be a resurrection at the end of time. And that's what Martha was talking about in this verse. Also, we won't look at this chapter, but Ezekiel 37, the concept of the valley of dry bones. That, of course, being symbolic of Israel being restored, but it's that concept of resurrection, coming back to life. And that's what Martha is saying here in verse 24 of John chapter 11. I know Lazarus, that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. Verse 25, Jesus said, I am the resurrection. You are staring at the resurrection. I'm the source of it. He's going to be the one who resurrects the dead at the last day. And He Himself will be resurrected after his own death, not long after this very incident. Then He goes on to say in verse 25, He who believes in me, though he may die, he shall live. You're going to die physically, but you're going to continue living. If you truly believe in me, obedient faith, you're going to die physically, but you're going to go on living in a better place. And in verse 26, whoever lives and believes in me shall never die. And really, for the faithful child of God, dying is not the end of it. They never really die. They just transition from this life to the next. And He said, do you believe this? And that's when she makes the statement, Lord, I believe. You are the Christ. You're the Messiah, the Son of God, who is to come into the world. That's the very confession that Peter makes in similar terms in Matthew chapter 16 when Jesus promised to establish His church. You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. So that's the confession that we basically make when we are baptized into Christ and live the Christian life. Any questions or comments before we go any further? Look at verse 28. And when she had said these things, she went her way and secretly called Mary, her sister, saying, the teacher has come and is calling for you. As soon as she heard that, she arose quickly and came to him. Now Jesus had not yet come into the town, but was in the place where Martha met him. Verse 31. Then the Jews who were with her in the house and comforting her, when they saw that Mary arose up quickly and went out, followed her, saying, she is going to the tomb to weep there. Verse 32. Then when Mary came where Jesus was and saw him, she fell down at his feet, saying to him, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. Saying basically the same thing that Martha said. If you'd have been here, you could have prevented this. But Jesus delayed for a reason. He delayed for a reason. They didn't understand it, but it was for a reason. And when you look at the big picture of things, if God delays something for a reason, do we have to understand it? We don't have to understand it. We just need to trust God. Trust Him. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Verse 33. Therefore, when Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her weeping, he groaned in the spirit and was troubled. This word groaned, if you study it in the Greek, it denotes deep sorrow for what's going on. Here you see the humanity of Christ having empathy with these people. It's much deeper than sympathy, it's empathy. He's empathizing with them, sharing in their sorrow. Verse 34. And he said, where have you laid him? They said to him, Lord, come and see. Verse 35, shortest verse in the Bible, Jesus wept. And this was, according to the language of weeping, a visible, outward crying. You could see him crying. It wasn't just he was standing there and a tear was coming down. He was crying. Sympathetic crying with those who are around him. Then the Jews said, see how he loved him. Jesus wept. Why would Jesus weep if he knew what he was about to do? I think so. I think that has something to do with it. He's, like I said, having empathy for them. He loved them too. Just the humanity of, you could be a, have you ever watched on TV something to do with a funeral or somebody that died for the country and tear up? You don't even know who the person is. But it touches you. The story touches you. You get tears in your eyes. Just knowing that. Just knowing it. It touches us to see people that we care about weeping, crying. One person suggested it could be because Jesus is seeing the effect of sin. Sin brought about the consequence of death. And he is seeing that this is what the devil is all about, sorrow, the suffering, the darkness of this world, and he's weeping for that reason. Here's something that I think that I've heard from other preachers that I think might be true. Jesus could be weeping for the fact that he knows he's going to bring Lazarus back from a better place into a wicked, ungodly world. That he is going to pull Lazarus' spirit out of paradise, a place of comfort and rest and protection, back into a world of wickedness. In fact, if the next chapter over, they're going to plot to kill Lazarus because he's proof positive Jesus is who he claimed to be. And Jesus knew he was going to pull Lazarus out of that terrible, or out of that wonderful place back into a terrible place. I mean, if we truly believe what the Bible says concerning how better off our loved ones are who have passed on to paradise, if we believe that they were faithful Christians, would we really want to bring them back here if we could? Why would we want to bring them back to this world of suffering, pain, agony, getting more and more dangerous each and every day? They're so far better off in that other realm. So that quite possibly could have been one of the reasons he's going to do his friend a disservice, in a sense, bringing him back into the world for the glory of God, but pulling him back into this realm of sorrows, this vale of tears, as it's described from time to time. But he has sympathy and empathy, and he identifies with the human condition. Jesus wept there in verse 35. It's the shortest verse in all the Bible, but it says so much about Jesus and how he cares. We sing the song, Does Jesus Care? I know he cares. Yes, he cares. And that's why the book of Hebrews says he's a sympathetic high priest. He knows what it's like to go to funerals. He went to them. But the amazing thing about it, every time he went to one, he interrupted it by raising the dead. Verse 37, and some of them said, could not this man who opened the eyes of the blind have kept this man from dying? Verse 38, Jesus again, groaning in himself, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone lay against it. This was very common practice to have a cave or a hewn out of a rock tomb with a stone rolled in front of it. Seemed to indicate that Lazarus was a wealthy individual, therefore not the Lazarus of Luke 16. The Lazarus of Luke 16 was a poor beggar. This Lazarus evidently was a wealthy individual. He had a tomb that was that had a stone rolled in front of it, very much like the rich tomb Jesus would be buried in and resurrected in. Verse 39, Jesus said, take away the stone. They weren't expecting that. Take away the stone. You don't do that. That's like saying, dig up the coffin. Dig up the coffin. Open the door of the mausoleum. You don't do that. He's been buried for 4 days. Jesus said, take away the stone. Martha, the sister of him who was dead, said, Lord, by this time there is a stench, for he has been dead for 4 days. Decomposition has taken place. They don't know what's going on here. Verse 40, Jesus said to her, did I not say to you that if you would believe, you would see the glory of God? Then they took away the stone from the place where the dead man was lying. Jesus lifted up his eyes and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. And I know that you always hear me. But because of the people who are standing by, I said this, that they may believe that you sent me. Now when he had said these things, he cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. And he who had died came out bound hand and foot with grave clothes. His face was wrapped with a cloth. And Jesus said to them, loose him and let him go. He would have been wrapped in this cloth. I mean, that's the way Jesus was buried, wrapped in the cloth. That's why when they went to the tomb, when Jesus was resurrected, they found that everything laying in its place. Because Jesus resurrected out of that situation. Here this man is being resurrected back into a life here on earth. Jesus was resurrected to die no more. His resurrection was different. He resurrected and showed himself alive over 40 days, then ascended back to the Father. Lazarus is being resurrected to a life here on earth to live a little bit longer and die again. And as one old preacher said, if Jesus had not called him by name, every body in that graveyard would have come forth. He specified, Lazarus, come forth. And the man that had been dead for 4 days, so long that his body had a stench due to decomposition, was resurrected and came out. A whole individual. And so you see here the power of Christ over those who have died, over death here. Verse 45 says, and many of the Jews who had come to Mary had seen the things that Jesus did, believed in him. But some of those who went away to the Pharisees and told them the things Jesus did, then the chief priests and the Pharisees gathered a council and said, what shall we do? For this man works many signs. What are we going to do? Notice his enemies didn't deny his miracles. They couldn't. He did this publicly, openly. I mean, if you put this in a modern day setting, what Jesus did, there would be TV cameras there watching what he did and resurrecting Lazarus from the dead. This was a public display of God's power, not something done secretly. So they plot to put him to death. I mean, they don't deny his miracles. They say, well, everybody's going to believe in him. We're going to lose our power. The Romans are going to come after us. We need to get rid of Jesus. He's causing us trouble. You look at chapter 12 and verse 9. John 12 and verse 9. Now a great many of the Jews that knew that he was there, and they came, not for the sake of Jesus only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. But the chief priest plotted to put Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews went away and believed in Jesus. That's a hard heart. That miracle of raising a man from the dead, you can't even deny. You're going to say, okay, we just need to put him back to death because he's proof that Jesus is who he claims to be. Very powerful miracle we have here of Jesus over power over death. So we look on page 60. We have just enough time to cover this on page 60 and 61. The location is Bethany, a village 2 miles from Jerusalem. Those present, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, Jews, his disciples, and those Jews who were comforting them, many Jews. The need, Lazarus became sick and died. Then Jesus has his interchange with Mary and Martha and Mary. The miracle, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Lazarus, come forth. Then he who died came out, bound hand and foot with grave clothes, and his face was wrapped with a cloth. The result, many of the Jews believed, but the Pharisees sought to kill him. You can't please everybody. You cannot please everybody. Here you do probably one of the best things you could do for someone, resurrect their loved one from the dead, and you still got people want to kill you for doing that good thing. So you shouldn't try to please everyone. You're not ever going to do it. You should just be trying to please God and doing His will and His will alone. So we see here, as we look at this little chart there on page 61, that Jesus is showing Himself to be Master or Lord by turning water into wine. In John chapter 2, Master over matter and quantity. He changed the structure from water into wine, and we talked about how that was non-alcoholic in nature due to the context there. And so He had the ability to do that. The healing of the nobleman's son in John chapter 4, He has master over distance and space. He didn't have to be there to heal that individual. Didn't have to lay hands on him. Healing a lame man, John chapter 5, master of time. He's willing to do this over a period of time. The feeding of 5,000, John chapter 6, master of quantity. He had the ability to multiply the loaves and the fishes to feed over 5,000 people. The walking on water, John chapter 6, master of gravity and natural laws. He could walk on water, which you cannot do naturally because of gravity. But because He created this world, He could suspend that law of gravity to perform that miracle. The healing of the man born blind, John chapter 9, the master of light and misfortune, those who had, of course, ailments that were even in our modern day society. Getting someone born blind to be able to see is so far out of our reach that even if there is some sort of advancement in that, it's due to years and years of research and something implanted in the brain to cause the optics to work just a little bit. Jesus just healed him. Master of, you could also say, biology. Why? He was in the beginning with God and was God. He created man. He knows more about the human eye and the human brain than any scientist of all time, all combined. Then, of course, Lazarus being resurrected, John chapter 11, shows his mastery over death. The last enemy to be destroyed, Paul tells us in 1 Corinthians 15, is death. Jesus conquered death by His resurrection from the dead to die no more. And when He returns someday, all that are in their graves will come forth. He will conquer death for every human being and then bring all of humanity into judgment. There will be a resurrection unto life and then a resurrection unto condemnation. And it's all going to be on that same day, the last day, when Jesus returns. Any questions or comment about that? Right.
Read into that a little bit. Before He got there, looks like they were probably talking amongst themselves, Mary and Martha, probably blaming, Jesus for not being there. So then when He got there, then that's why they were both saying the same thing at a separate time, because they were talking. And even though there was a bigger picture that they could see, that's the same thing that I think
Right.
we even do now. We blame God for not careful for circumstances when we don't know the big picture of His big plan.
Exactly. Verse 3 says of chapter 11, they sent word to Jesus saying, Lord, behold, he who you love is sick. So they sent Him the message to let Him know He's sick. He says His sickness is not unto death, but to glorify God. And it says, even though He loved Mary and Martha, He did not immediately respond to them. And when He heard that He had sick, He stayed 2 more days, verse 6. Some people think that if God does not immediately respond to whatever they want, God has forsaken me. God doesn't love me. They were hoping He would come. And when He did not come, according to their wishes at that time, you could have prevented this. But it turned out for something greater. Christ knows best. God knows best. He sees the big picture. And so we just need to trust Him. There's a good lesson here about trusting Jesus. Why did He delay? Well, He was going to resurrect Him from the dead. Mary and Martha didn't know that. They thought they're going to send a message to Him. Jesus is going to come to His friend, Lazarus. Why would He let him suffer? Heal him. He didn't do that. He let him suffer, let him die, but then resurrected him from the dead. If we look at the big picture too as well, if we have loved ones that are suffering and we pray and they continue to suffer and they die, we got to look at the big picture. God's going to raise them up in the last day. They're going to be resurrected. If they've been faithful to the Lord, they're going to have a resurrection into life in heaven. So we've got to see things the way God sees things, and wait on God and trust in God, even when we don't get our way immediately when we think it ought to be. We will continue our study next week, Lord willing.